These are live pictures. Air Force Two in Phoenix just landing with a jet carrying Charlie Kirk's casket along with his family. We're going to see them deplane in just moments here. Arizona is where Kirk lived with his wife and 2 young children. Only an hour ago, Vice President J.D. Vance helped carry Kirk's casket onto Air Force Two in Utah, seen placing his hand on Kirk's casket. We'll see them get off here in just a few moments. As President Trump says he spoke earlier with Charlie Kirk's wife, offering these details about their call.
I spoke to Erica, his wife, and we had a long talk, and she's devastated. She is absolutely devastated, as you can imagine.
And tonight we are learning more about Erica Kirk, who we'll see in just a moment, founder of a faith-based clothing line, a podcast host, a former model. Sunland Sarfati is out front.
The beautiful, legendary Erica.
I love you so much.
I love you.
For 36-year-old Erica Kirk,
I literally won the jackpot with my husband.
Vice versa.
her marriage to 31-year-old Charlie Kirk became the center of her life, with much of it playing out in public.
I love you.
I love you too.
Second only, she says, to her first priority, her faith.
Now more than ever, your faith has to be so on fire.
The two have been married for 4 years, getting engaged 2 years after their first meeting.
Do you think that I had an issue understanding where Charlie stood when he looked at me across Bill's Burgers table and said, "I'm not going to hire you, I'm going to date you"?
They went on to have 2 kids, a 1-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl.
Motherhood it's not a pause, it's a launch pad.
She's committed herself to homeschooling their kids while supporting him.
I love submitting to Charlie because he's a phenomenal leader, and the way that he loves me melts me to want to be able to help. How can I help you?
By his side as he traveled the country, but also speaking out herself.
I want you guys to be able to just live such an abundant, joy-filled life that you know how to battle in the trenches of this world and the foxholes of this culture.
Not just espousing his political beliefs,
My husband, Charlie Kirk, is a force.
but complementing his with what she says are her more conservative values.
I am a moderate compared to Erica. Erica is very conservative, and
I was raised well.
Raised in Scottsdale, Arizona by her mother, her parents divorced when she was young. Her grandfather was an immigrant from Sweden. She studied political science in college and is working on her doctorate in Christian leadership and biblical studies. She was briefly an NCAA women's basketball player.
Everyone thought I was a little boy because I wore Jordan and all these different types of athletic clothes.
Crowned Miss Arizona in 2012.
I love to work out. I love to spend time with my family. I love to play with my dogs.
She has a nonprofit,
Internationally, we support and sustain several orphanages throughout Europe.
a devotional podcast, and a Christian clothing company.
I guess you could say I'm a social entrepreneur where I find little pockets within a culture that I like to disrupt.
Her partnership in life and politics with Kirk often tinged with concern for their well-being, something she mentioned during her most recent podcast.
You know, my husband is on college campuses getting screamed at by college kids as he's trying to share with them the truth. And he is so calm. Would I be calm? No, I wouldn't. I barely go to those only because I don't trust myself not climbing over the table and attacking someone in the crowd because I'm very protective of my husband.
She acknowledged his appearances made them vulnerable, but in conversation with her husband, committed to stay their chosen course together.
Do I get hate? Bring it on.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have a velvet steel spine by the end of my life, so bring it on. I have nothing to fear.
Now, these are live pictures of Air Force Two now in Phoenix. Erica on board, family, and Kirk's casket along with Vice President Vance. Mina Durson is in Phoenix at the airport. Mina, that plane just landing moments ago as we were airing that piece about Erica. So you're looking there at that plane. We understand the casket is on board, the family is on board, and we expect to see them any moment.
Maybe 30 or 40 supporters.
Yes.
With signs.
We are seeing, people coming off of the plane. We did see Vice President Vance helping to load that casket back in Utah. So they were on the plane for the past hour or so, and now we're seeing, he was expected to accompany the Kirk family here to Phoenix, where they live, and then the vice president is expected to not stay. He's expected to get back on this plane and take off, while the family is expected to take Charlie Kirk's remains to a private location. So we are just, able to see some people exiting the plane as we speak.
I know, we expect to see them coming off, and as we know, Vice President Vance put his hand on the casket as they loaded that casket onto Air Force Two, really just not long ago, only about a half an hour ago, for this very short flight to bring Charlie Kirk's remains home. Kristen Holmes is with us. Kristen, J.D. Vance going here to Utah, to Phoenix, instead of New York on 9/11, doing that for Charlie Kirk, not just in his role as vice president, but they were extremely close as friends, right?
They had an incredibly close personal relationship. It was friendly, but also J.D. Vance essentially credited all of his success politically to Charlie Kirk. A couple of things to keep in mind here. One, Vance was really someone who wasn't on anyone's radar, particularly in Trump world. He was someone who was reviled. He had spoken out against Donald Trump repeatedly, and it was Charlie Kirk who introduced him to Don Jr., Donald Trump's son. In addition to that, Kirk convinced Donald Trump Jr. or Don Jr. That Vance had changed his ways, his mind, that he really did believe in Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And it wasn't an easy thing to do. Everyone had seen those clips of Vance. In addition to that, what we know is that it was Don Jr. who pushed Donald Trump over the line when he was picking his vice presidential pick, and that's why he chose J.D. Vance. So all of these things in a succession. Even before that, Charlie Kirk and J.D. Vance tangentially knew each other. They had spoken. And when Vance wanted to run for Senate in Ohio, he went to Charlie Kirk to ask him for advice, to ask him if he thought he could help him, or if he thought he could even win in Ohio. At that point, internal polling, I believe, showed him, barely crossing over into single digits. And it was Kirk who introduced him around, who encouraged him. And that story, just so you know, is one that we've heard repeatedly from so many people in Trump's orbit. Even last night, we saw the press secretary who, before she was doing this, she did run for Congress at 23 years old in New Hampshire. And she said one of her biggest advocates was Charlie Kirk. He was always pushing youth forward. But when it comes to J.D. Vance and Charlie Kirk, it wasn't just them that were friends. Their families were friends. They had spent an enormous amount of time together. And in some ways, they had very similar roles within the Trump administration. Of course, J.D. Vance is the vice president, and that is a huge position. Charlie Kirk was not in the administration. However, both of them often have served as a mediator when there are tense relationships between various cabinet members. I'll remind you, of course, of Pam Bondi and Kash Patel over the Epstein files. We know it was J.D. Vance who negotiated that. I was also told at points that when things were very tense between President Trump and Elon Musk, Charlie Kirk was talking to Elon Musk, was encouraging him to come around, to stop speaking poorly about the agenda. They're both seen as kind of these peacemakers in various ways. They had a skill set, or have a skill set, where they're able to talk to both, both sides of a problem. And that's very difficult in Trump world. Things get very heated, and yet they still manage to have that. So you see them connecting on a different plane. And Aaron, just to tell you a little bit about this trip, it is clearly so important for the vice president to be there. Keep in mind, he canceled his commemorative trip to New York. But not only that, he went to a location where there is a known assassin on the loose who has not been captured, who just killed not only his friend, but a conservative activist. So there's a security threat there, too. It's not ideal for a vice president, but he wanted to be there.
Which is an important point to make. And Congressman Kinzinger is with us as well, as we're awaiting to see the casket brought off this plane, the family. A somber moment as the country is dealing with the horrible political assassination, as it appears it clearly was. So, Congressman, I guess the big question is here, here I can maybe see some movement getting off the plane there, so we'll keep an eye on that. Mina Durson is there on the ground, so she'll jump in if she needs to. But Congressman, what happens now, right? There's a brief moment of reeling for the country, and then there's the what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's up to us, to Americans. It's up to leaders. It's up to people that are involved politically. Do we want this to spiral further? Because it's really easy to let it spiral further. Somebody gets retribution on that retribution. Or do we want to actually leave our kids and our grandkids a country better than the one we found? Every generation of Americans has done that, I think, mostly left their kids a better country. And now we're like the first generation that actually is at threat of not doing that. And a legacy of violence, a legacy of democracy itself is invented to prevent violence. It's a way to dispel, different viewpoints into action. And so it's important that we stand up and fight for democracy, for truth, and for doing it peacefully.